Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Inner Voice Show podcast. It is so great to be with you today. I'm Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist, author, and the originator of the awareness integration theory. Our conversation here is about what matters most in our life, our minds, our thoughts, feelings, actions, relationships, and our fulfillment in this beautiful journey of life. A couple of announcements first. For all psychotherapists, mental health practitioners, and life coaches, the Essentials of Awareness Integration Theory course is coming up. June 24th to 26th is going to be online. The early bird special is coming up on June 10th. So sign up real quick. The space is very limited. Love to have you all there to share with you the theory and intervention. You can go to awarenessintegration.com and get all the information and how to sign up, and love to have you there. Today, I chat with Michele Neff Hernandez. She is the author of Different After You. It's a great book. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend it. She is the 2021 CNN hero. She's a gifted speaker and a committed advocate for the widowed and the bereaved. Her creation of Camp Widow and Soaring Spirits has brought her international acclaim. Michele regularly speaks to first responders, hospital workers, religious congregations, and diverse community organizations. She lives in Southern California. You can catch her at micheleneffhernandez.com. And we had an amazing conversation about the process of the grief, what someone will go through, and how can they honor their grief, who they have been, and move on to creating an amazing life. So I'm sure that you will also experience it and enjoy it as much as I did. Subscribe to this podcast, my YouTube channel, Dr. Foojan Zeine, and connect with me through my website, foojanzeine.com, any of the social media that you have. I love to hear from you about your ideas, who you want me to talk to, what topics you want me to talk about, all in all. But here it is. Let's talk to Michele. Michele, it is so nice to have you with us on this podcast. Thank you so much for coming in and spending the time with us.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
We're going to talk about your book, Different After You. It's beautiful the way that it's written. First of all, it's not only your own experience, but then also matches so many of the experience of people who have lost their mate or someone who's so important in their life that kind of, they identified with, and they were a part of everyday life. And you share about the culture that it's almost like some cultures expect you to grieve really quick. You've got about 3 days.
That's right.
You should be laughing and moving on and be very comfortable with going back to work and all of that. And then we have cultures who spend a year in the grief, and the whole family systems and, the whole city and the town are holding them in the grief. And sometimes even when they're ready to move on, they're thinking, I can't move on because in the eye of the society, I have to hold a particular way of being. And I think you touch upon all of these so beautifully. Michele, can you first share about why you wanted to write this book?
Well, when I was 35, my 39-year-old husband went out for his regular afternoon bike ride and was hit and killed by a car, thrusting me sort of into a completely new life that I didn't have any experience with. And I actually didn't have anybody in my life who had any experience with. And so it was my first experience of grieving anyone close to me, but certainly as close as a spouse. And so I suddenly was in a whole new world. And the initial thought was, how do I find people who understand what this is like? Because as well supported as I was by my community and my friends group and my family, none of them were widowed. And so, for things like, how long do you keep the wedding ring on, or where do you put all his clothes? Nobody had any information. And so I just thought, I need to find other widowed people to ask these questions, which of course led to the reality that there's a million different ways to answer those questions. But at the time, it felt important to ask them. And so that initial process of questioning and wondering how other people have made their way through widowed life led me to not only eventually write this book, which is very different than the one I intended to write in the beginning, but also to create the community around the widowed experience, which is sort of a foundational part of the book as well.
You share in the book at one point that you felt a lesser version of ourselves at that moment, that you have the ability to function, but then you go special into a zone, which it feels like non-functionality. I remember talking to a lot of my clients who have lost their mate, and some to shock, and some to like shock of accident, the same way that you were talking about, and some to illnesses. But it's interesting that when it was, obviously there's a different experience when you go through illnesses and you're hoping and you're holding on the torch of no, at any minute it's all going to be okay. And somehow you don't want to believe that. And even in the hospitals, people just don't want to believe. And still after, the mate has passed on, that sometimes the shock comes and the grief takes a whole different level, versus someone who gets shocked because there's not even an idea about it, that I'm going to lose my mate. Life goes on as daily, and then the shock comes in. So partly about your own experience, but partly with all of the years that you've worked with other people, can you share a little bit about the differences of these two when you feel, like you said, a lesser version of you?
The interesting thing, I think, is that there is this sense of a lesser version, however it is you came to the place, whether of your person being dead, whether that's a shocking experience, a traumatic loss in regards to an accident, or some other type of experience, heart-related, or to, like you said, sort of an expected death. The interesting thing for me, and in particular, part of the thing about Different After You, is that it's almost like no matter how we came to land on the square that said, now you have to start rebuilding your life, all of us landed there. And so for everyone, and this is really true for anyone who's grieving, but in particular for people who are grieving a spouse or partner, you land on the square and everybody is kind of on step one. What do I do with myself now? How do I build a life of meaning for this version of myself? Because I've been changed by whatever it was I experienced. So to compare and contrast the experience of a sudden death to a more expected death, for a sudden person, I was cooking dinner at 5 o'clock and I was widowed at 6:30. And for a person who has been a caregiver for years, or who has been involved in the ongoing, perhaps it's research, perhaps it's, trials. I mean, all, like you said, the hope of maybe we're going to make our way through this. Those two different avenues to arrive on that same square are going to influence how you process the next steps. But we all have to find a way to discover what's going to be next for ourselves, because we all have come to a place where a key pivotal person in our life is dead, and we have to figure out who we are in the aftermath. And that includes the things that have influenced us through their death. So in the case of a caregiver, a lot of times people in a caregiving situation struggle with, well, what's my purpose now? I have really focused on this one thing, and now the thing is completely useless. None of this research I did worked. All of the medical equipment around our house is no longer necessary. So that's one piece. And then for a sudden widowed person, it's the shock of like still waking up every day trying to figure out what happened? How did that thing happen? And so in some ways it is very different. In other ways it's similar. And also true for people who have experienced a different type of traumatic experience, if it's a different relationship to the person who died, or sometimes it's our own traumatic illness or our own job loss or a divorce, like one of whatever it is that we have lived through that's changed the way we look at the world has changed us intrinsically. And we have to discover who we are after that, after we make our way, even begin to make our way into the processing of that experience.
I was talking to a woman who they were driving, they parked, and she got out of the car, and then her husband was driving, got out of the car on his side, and then a car hit him and died immediately. The shock that was there, it was very interesting that for a while, she would look at her husband's picture and not even know him. And she got scared. Did I lose him completely? How come I don't know him? How come I don't miss him? I don't even know what, where I am versus like the life I have. And it took almost 6 months before that shock and effect actually calmed down, in knowing who she is and who her husband was for her. So it's interesting what our brain does at the time of shock or at the time of loss. You had in your book talked about, and I love this analogy that you talked about, like the broken family vase, when it's when it's dropped and it's broken, that everybody's shocked around us and looking at it, and then each person starts taking some parts of it and then tries to see then how can we put this back together, and is it ever going to be the same base, or obviously not, how can I put it back together where it does hold the family culture and it's useful and it's moving forward. Can you share a little bit about that?
I think that this analogy is important because we can all imagine a shattered vase and the sense of like, there's no way this is going to be the same. And it's an accepted understanding that that vase can't be the same. But when our lives are shattered, we do come to it with this idea that somehow our lives will be the same again. When the truth is they cannot be. They can't be exactly the same. Just like when you try to glue that vase back together, it isn't going to be the same vase. It can't be. And even if all the pieces broke, let's say you had 6 perfectly broken pieces and they could all fit right back together, there's still going to be the cracks in the lines where you have to put the glue in, whatever it is that you use to pull that vase back together. And the reason I think it's a useful analogy when we consider it for a life is that so often we set ourselves up for failure by saying something horrible has happened to me and I'm not going to let it change me. I'm not going to be changed by what's happened. And we set the goal for success, a successful processing, to feel like we always, just like we did before, but we can't. It's impossible, just like the vase is impossible to be exactly the same, because there's so many things that we now know that we've now experienced. So, for me, as a personal example, now when I hear an ambulance, I never don't assume that it could be coming for somebody I love, because on the day when my husband died, I heard the ambulance. I didn't know it was going for him. I just heard an ambulance like you would in the background of any given day. And so for me, that's a new understanding. And that's always going to change the way I look at the world. It doesn't mean that and to come back to a question you asked earlier about feeling less than, I think because we set ourselves up with this sense of like, I'm not going to be changed. And if I am changed, then that means I'm not as good as I was before. I think that if we can reframe that to say the vase is broken, it's been put back together. And rather than have the goal, it being exactly the same, it being as beautiful as it can be in a new space. And if we can apply that to our lives, then that allows us to come away, instead of thinking I'm not as good as I was before, I'm a lesser version. Instead, it can be I'm a new version and I'm getting to know that new self. And I'm learning how what I've lived through has influenced who I am today.
Yes. You share about 2 sets of grieving, which I think is so important, because one set of grieving is about the future that's no longer going to be the same as I ever imagined it to be. but also the grieving for who I used to be,
Mhm.
missing my life, missing
Mhm.
the way that I was before, or everything that, kind of like was a routine, and then maybe even I took it for granted because it was there. And some of it worked and some of it didn't work, but uh, I miss it. And
Mhm.
sometimes those are the times we keep going back and, rehashing what it was and asking and bargaining, kind of, even sometimes being punitive. And I wish I did that. And I wish I did this one. And why didn't I do that? And if I could do that. And I think that's part of the process of grieving when we put ourselves through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think it's so worthwhile for us to talk about the fact that we are not only grieving the person who died, but the person we were with that person. Because sometimes we confuse the two. And when we're struggling to find a new self, we think there's something wrong with us. But the truth is that, for me, one of the things I miss is that I used to always believe everything was going to work out. I did. I just was one of those people. I always believed it. And now I know that's not true. It doesn't always work out how we want it to work out, or it doesn't always work out. The diagnosis sometimes does end in death instead of someone beating the odds. But it's okay to miss that version of myself that didn't know. I just didn't know yet. And so, it was a naive, kind of beautiful place to be when I used to believe that. And so it's okay to miss that. It's okay to miss the person who doesn't know what it's like to grieve someone. It's okay to miss, not forgetting where you put your keys. It's okay to miss, any of the things about yourself that used to be things that you knew and counted on. What I hope people will get from the book is the opportunity to continue to learn and get to know the new person you're becoming, allowing them to be different so that we can value this person equally. It's not going to be the same. It can't be the same, but it can be equally valuable.
Very much. You begin the conversation of shifting gear from, part of the grieving that is the loss and the missing into a rebuilding with the concept of creating an inventory of what no longer works or no longer fits in the present moment, or it was very valuable with the old you or with the old circumstances in life. How do you suggest for people to begin looking at that inventory?
I always like to tell people to start with their physical space. Start with the easiest, closest thing to you. Look on your desk and say, do I still like that thing? If I don't, if it doesn't mean the same thing it used to mean to me, it's okay to move it. Because what happens is, especially in grief, after a person dies, it's like we have to freeze everything just how it is sometimes and say, okay, this is the way that I honor my person. I'm not changing anything. For other people, though, they feel like I have to change everything. And so my hope for people is that they will just start asking themselves questions. I think, where do I usually go for lunch? Was that a place we used to go to? Did I like it? And sometimes the answer is, well, I'm only going because, he loved Mexican food. I actually don't really like it that much, but I don't feel like it's something I can change, because then would I be giving up on him, or would I not be honoring him? And so I just want people to start asking the questions about their physical space, about their daily habits, about their jobs, about the people they spend time with. And the intention here is not to change everything necessarily. It's to ask yourself, does this fit for me in this new life? And sometimes the answer is yes. And sometimes the answer is surprisingly no. And sometimes we find a surprising new thing because we're willing to ask the questions, what do I like? And I think that's the crux of it, is the willingness to just let the question sit there. You don't have to have an answer right now. You can just say to yourself, what is it that I want? And let it sit. Because a lot of times we're so focused on trying to get to the answer and make sure that we are able to answer the question, do I like that food or not? That we go to the old answer, the default answer. Well, yes, I always do. So if we can just sit with the questions, I feel like that's the first space. And taking inventory, the intention there is to be able to give ourselves the chance to explore what this new person might like and might want.
And I think the inventory, as you set it up, it works a lot to look at. Is there a way that I can honor my mate and have my mate in some particular way still with me as I move forward without having to freeze life?
Yeah.
Freeze the house exactly the way it was, or some of the behaviors that I used to do, and do it as if that person is alive. Because I know, although in some level necessary for our grief, and as we go and to bring ourselves from one process to the next, sometimes I've watched people for like 10 years live as if the person is still living with them. They would get up and have the same kind of conversation and go back and forth and rehearse the conversation that they had with their husband or their wife, and the answer from what they remembered, and have create these dialogue. And then the house is exactly the same way, and they don't move from that time on as if life is being frozen in their own imaginative space, and they no longer live in life as reality of out there with other people and all of it. My experience as a therapist has been to work with them to complete that and somehow take whatever representation it is that they want with them, but still be in the moment, in the present moment of what reality looks like in life and with people around them. What have you experienced, and with all of the thousands and thousands of people who you have explored this process?
The interesting thing for me, I think, is when people are freezing themselves in a space, oftentimes they're confusing love with pain and grief. And so a lot of times we do that because we want to make sure that we're honoring our person. We want to make sure that we continue a connection with them, which is vitally important to our healing. But that healing connection can still be vibrant. It can still be current. So instead of having to freeze it as it was when they were alive, we can continue to develop it as we figure out, how do I include this person in my life as I move forward? Is that through letters? Is that through pictures? Is that through honoring them in events, or going to maybe you do go on the anniversary of their death to a restaurant you love, and continue to honor your person, and yet recognize that you yourself are living a very different life, and being able to then start to engage with it. I'll say that many people have very different reactions to this, and can take a longer or shorter time for them, depending on so many different factors. But I'm thinking of what you said at the top of our conversation, which is sometimes other people around us seem to hold us in our grief because of societal expectations. And so it's sort of the reverse of that, right? It's like for some people, they feel frozen in this space, like they can't get out, and only thing people can see is a widowed person when they look at them. For other people, they want to make sure nobody sees anything but a widowed person. And the reason they do that is because they think that that's the best way to honor their person. I like to encourage people to remember that two separate things have happened here. Your person has died, and the version of you that lived with them has died too. And so because of those two separate things, one reality is this person's never going to walk through your door again. The next reality is you can't be the same as you were, and your choice now is how to evolve and if you evolve. Because when we don't, there are gifts that come from this experience, and so often they're unwanted, right? We don't want to have gifts that come to us in a horrible package that was traumatic and awful, but not accepting the gift on the other side doesn't change the reality that your person died. And so many times, so separating those things in the same way as you separate the person died and the version of you that was with them died, there is a bad thing that happened that was traumatic and difficult. And in addition, there were gifts that came with it. You can accept one and choose not to accept the other. It's optional whether or not you allow those gifts into your life, but doing so isn't going to change the bad thing. The bad thing still exists, whether or not you choose to allow the gifts that can come with it to be a part of your current life.
You talk also about prioritization at this conjuncture of life, to
Mhm.
what is a priority and how can I bring myself to create a life,
Yeah.
right? So it's because for many people, it seems like life just ended, not only for my mate, but also for me.
Mhm.
And recreation of it is, as a single person, sometimes is so terrifying for them. They have
Mhm.
no idea what that looks like.
Right.
And then when they look at it and it's like, I don't want it. It's really
Mhm.
interesting. It's like, I know I can do that. I just don't want it.
Mhm.
And then when you're standing in that doorway, and
Mhm.
instead of walking out, you keep turning back and going back into a fantasy of what is. I think that's part of the dilemma. And so share about prioritization and how to open this door and look at the other side with the gifts.
Well, and first, I want to also acknowledge that there is a benefit to looking backwards at those doors and to turning your face towards. And it's why the book starts with a step acknowledging. It's like, okay, the first thing I have to do is acknowledge that I am not the same person. And then I get to move into the grief stage, which is now I'm grieving not only the person who died, but also the self that died. And sometimes we need some space there to be able to do that for a little while. But when we can use that powerful key of acknowledgement, then when it's time to start asking the questions, taking inventory and beginning to start to shape something for yourself, then you're able to lean into what comes next, which will include the gifts. And I think one of the key gifts that my grief experience has given me is the real world perspective that people dying means that we have a limited amount of time on this earth. And that has changed the way I choose to use my time. And so while I wouldn't have thought that this would be a gift that I got, nor would I have signed up for it in this way if I had a choice, I didn't have a choice, but it is a gift that has come. And as a result of that, I think differently about the way I personally walk in the world. I think that this is a key gift that most grieving people have access to if only they will allow it into their lives. And if they do, it will start to shape how they answer those questions. What do I want? What do I care about? Who do I want in my life? What kind of relationships are valuable to me? And so that helps us to begin to use that perspective to ask the questions, which then help to build the life for the person that we're becoming. We can't do any of that unless we give ourselves permission. And there's no other permission that we need. Even in the case where society wants to hold you in a space, we can still make those personal choices to start deciding how we want to show up for our life. And no one can make that choice but us. And I think that's the hard work of grief. That's the hard work of grief recovery, is that no one can do the work but you. And sometimes, as you said, we don't want to. I don't want to do the work. I'm not interested in doing the work. And that to me often signals that there's a time still that's necessary for the grieving and that there's still work to be done there. And if you find yourself stuck in that space, getting help to have some additional perspective to help you move through the grief space so that as you enter the discovery phase and the inventory phase, you can feel ready to create something for yourself, because that's the pivotal piece, is giving yourself permission to have a different life.
Um, you also shared about, which I think is brilliant, about the filtering what comes in the name of love and support from others. Part of what we were talking about at the beginning was when a community around you, whether they're family or friends or the culture of that city or group that you live in, holds a particular stance for you, or you hear mixed messages from people where somebody comes in and says, you've grieved enough, let's move on, I'm going to come in and help you unpack everything, pack everything that is here and move on, and why don't you start dating and all of that. And another one comes in and consistently talks about your mate and their the past experiences they had with you and your mate, and insists that you have to hold yourself in that space. So you might get very confusing messages from the world around you. And I've also watched people have to answer. For example, if there was an issue, other people come in because they're having an anxiety about their own loss, and they'll come in and say, well, how come you didn't do that? And did you do this? And did you talk to the doctor? Did you check this? And it's almost like you're getting interrogated for why didn't you keep your mate alive? And it puts a lot of burden on you that you're going through the grief. So the filtering and kind of even stating to some people like, I don't want to hear it at this point, or this is not something that I want to concentrate on, or setting boundaries for people in a way. It's so important in this time of grief.
It really is. And I think the thing is, no matter what trauma you've lived through, if you're grieving or if you've experienced some kind of other traumatic experience, oftentimes we find ourselves feeling unable to deal with the emotional aftermath. And so what we do is we open our borders really wide and we say, everybody come in, I need help. I need help figuring out what kind of fence to get when my fence fell down. I need help, making sure the kids can get to and from, I need help. And then after a while, all that help starts multiplying into, all, as you said, people who have differing opinions, conflicting opinions. Sometimes, well-intentioned but awful things are said to people as they're trying to put their lives back together. So my personal experience was that I first opened the doors and said, everybody come in. And then I was overwhelmed by the amount of feedback that I was getting. And so I said, forget it, nobody in. And so I shut the doors instead. And then it's just myself. But in the case of a death of a spouse or partner, your sounding board is no longer available. And so I realized that I was making my life harder than it needed to be by shutting everyone out. And I needed to figure out who were the important people who could support me and whose advice I valued and who I did not doubt had my best interests at heart. And I sort of devised a structure to say, okay, these kind of people, which I call the fish feeders, they're people who are doing things for you in your daily, they're the people you call. If I need something, this is my person. So if that person says to me, I was thinking about your problem and here's a solution I came up with, I may not choose to go with that solution, but it's my job to consider what they have to say. They know me, they love me, they're supporting me in other ways. At least consider what they say. Doesn't mean that's what I'll choose, but it's something to consider. And so I go through sort of a step-by-step process for identifying all the people in your life. And I like to tell people I include all the way to the person who was in the grocery store and told me, had met me one time, saw me in the grocery store after I was grieving my husband's death and said, honey, if you don't wipe that sad look off your face, no one's ever going to want to have anything to do with you. And so it was like, this lady doesn't know me at all. Why in the world would she say that to me? And so people have asked me, but why would you include that kind of person in the filtering process? Because do you want to know how much time I spent thinking about what that lady said? Way, way too much, because it was hurtful, because it felt like it came out of left field. And I thought, she sees something I don't see. And so rather than spend time thinking about, my sister who had said something thoughtful and useful, I didn't spend any time thinking about that. I was too worried about the lady who told me I needed to wipe the sad look off my face. And so I like to highlight that so people remember that when this is true for all humans, but in my experience, it's particularly true for anyone who's grieving or going through a trauma. Everybody knows how to fix it. Everybody wants to tell you what to do. Everybody has some nugget of advice that they can give. And to be fair, a lot of that could be valuable. But if you are unable to take it in because there's too much coming in at once, and it's mixed in with the people who say things that are horrible and useless, then it's difficult to identify where you should put your attention and time. So I developed this structure of being able to identify all the people in your life and know that the people who are closest to you are the ones who can best act as sounding board. And then there's another layer and another layer and another layer of support that's available for us. It also helps to identify if you're a person who's struggling and just really doesn't have a great support system, to be able to kind of say, okay, you know what, I need to find some people who are fish feeders. Like I need to develop some meaningful relationships so that I feel like I have some sounding boards available to me. And so it's built both to help you process some information that may be coming in already, as well as to develop a really sustaining support system as you move through not only whatever grief experience you're having now, but any challenge that you may face in the future.
And As we go through the priorities, as we look at the doors that are being open and find the ones who are amazing resource and sounding board for us, then we open the possibilities of creating what you call an unexpected life, because you didn't expect it. It's now an unexpected life, and now it's like a canvas that we're throwing things at and kind of finding ourselves as who we are, as a new person, as a new single person, and walking out into the world. Now, some people have their jobs to go back to, and that's just part of the consistency. Some people have their children, and it's their consistency. And some people don't. If they were a homemaker and they were relying on their husband, suddenly a whole new set of circumstances open up, which they might have to really look at completely a different possibilities. So is it that they can go on with what it was, and it's an area of life that changes, or pretty much every area of life changes, and they have to really look at this unexpected life that is there and to create the possibilities? So share with us about that.
The thing I love about the idea of an unexpected life, for sure, I'm an example of that. When my husband died, I was a personal trainer. I thought that my life was going to be in physical fitness. I loved what I did. I loved my clients. I loved my business. And then in the aftermath of his death, I started following the path of creating a community for widowed people. And as that community grew and grew and grew, it became clear I had to make a choice. Was I going to continue in the passion that I had before, or was I going to follow this developing passion? And so never in a million years would I have imagined myself, at the head of an organization serving widowed people around the world. It was not something that was ever on my radar. I don't know, how do you even dream that thing? And so I think that's true for every person, though. There's a million dreams out there that are yet to be discovered or realized that can just form this really, when you look back, say 10 years later, and think, I never would have imagined myself here. The path to here is full of asking those questions about what matters to you and about giving yourself permission to follow the threads. And so in my case specifically, I didn't quit my job and just begin serving widowed people. I did both for quite a while. I kept asking myself the question, what's filling me? And the answer kept continually pointing to creating this space for widowed people and finding a way to make that my passion, my vocation. And so it was thread by thread. It wasn't just like one day I woke up and thought, okay, now I have a whole new life. It was the building of that life by following passions, by asking questions, by being willing to hear a different answer. If I had stubbornly stuck to what I knew and what was safe for me and what I was doing at the time, then I would have just lived a different life. It wouldn't be this life. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I say that because I don't want people to imagine that I'm suggesting the best thing to do is throw everything out the window and start again. What I'm saying is that in some ways, everything's already been thrown out the window. What I want you to do is look at what's left and decide what's best for you, this version of you, and allow yourself to explore that, because you may come right back to where you were and discover that is what's best for you. And maybe, like you said, that job you love is what kept you sane. Managing the kids is what helps you figure out how to get out of bed. For people who have a completely different life, the possibilities can be exciting if we can separate it from the pain of how they came to us. And sometimes people struggle with that separation, but as I said, it's the permission that we have to give ourselves to be able to build that unexpected life and wake up one day realizing all the threads I pulled together have created this beautiful thing. And oftentimes I think people can be surprised by how beautiful the future can be, especially when it begins with a traumatic event that has wiped everything out, and you can't imagine any beauty coming from these, bits of vase that are everywhere.
Absolutely. One of the things that you said, which I think it resonated, is sometimes when people are talking about and share, like, let go of the pain, and they're like, well, I can't. There's no way of letting go of the pain, because whenever you think about it is there. And like what you said at the beginning was, Sometimes I think if I let go of the pain, I'm letting go of like betraying
Yeah.
not only the person, but also betraying who I was all of these years with my mate. So you share about not necessarily having to let go, but actually making peace with it. So
Mhm.
it's a different, it's here, it's not going anywhere, but how can I, you know, such as an illness, such as if I lost a part of my body,
Mhm.
every time I see it, I might see that it's not there, but I can come to another way of being with it.
I think that that's the beauty of integration, which is one of the key elements of the work of the book. And what I mean by integration is taking everything, every part of our life, and allowing it a seat at our table. So if you imagine yourself as, having a table of people who interact in your life, oftentimes we think bad things don't deserve a place at the table. So I don't want my grief to have a seat at the table. But the truth is that our grief and the traumas through which we live always are part of us. And whether or not we give them a seat at the table, they're under the table then, or they're going to hop out of a closet when you're not looking. So allowing them a seat at the table means that what I have learned from my grief experience can be utilized in my life as I build it. And rather than ignore the coping techniques or the resilience that I've developed through the hard things I've lived through and pretend they don't exist. Because if I'm putting them in the closet, that means the resilience goes too. And all the coping tools go too. I need those. So I need my grief to have a seat at the table. And that means that your person's never going to be fully gone. They're always going to be a part of who you are. They're a part of your life story. They're a part of building the person you are. Even this new version of yourself is influenced by who you were and what you knew. And in that way, we don't lose any version of ourselves. We just continue to evolve and include newer versions with each evolution. And, the reality is that evolutions come not only with horrible things, but also with great things. And so we just don't talk about the way we evolve with great things because they're expected often and they're worked for, like a graduation from college. You would never say to yourself like, oh, my college graduation was not or my college life was not something that was valuable. It shaped me. It helped me become who I am. But because that's valuable, it's considered valuable everywhere. We don't think of it as a transformative experience, and yet it was. And so grief is similar in that it's a transformative experience that teaches us so much about ourselves, about the world around us, about our relationships. And so it needs a seat at our table in order for us to move through. And when we try to move it away, I think that's when we struggle with just what you were talking about. The inability to move forward often is tied to our inability to find a way to integrate what we've experienced into the life we're building.
And you complete your book with ways of embracing the new you, allowing yourself, feeling that you deserve it, feeling that the evolution has happened, knowing that who you have become is part of all of this, and then allowing yourself to soar with all of the experiences versus holding back or feeling that I don't deserve it, or if I move on, then it means that I've lost my past and lost that person. So there's a way of shifting where it becomes deserving to embrace. And this new unexpected life that you're creating, and the new you that has kind of opened up out of all of the suffering that has gotten created.
Well, you used a powerful word, which was betrayal. And I think a lot of times we hold ourselves back from being joyful and proud of the person that we've become because it came from such a horrible place. And so we feel somehow that if this version of me, let's say it's better than the version of me before, then I feel like I'm betraying the life that I had by celebrating this. But what I want to tell people all the time is that the bad things already happened. Joy is optional. And being proud of yourself is optional. Owning who you can be optional. And so, we don't get a choice about the bad thing. It already happened. Nothing's going to change that. The only thing we have a choice going forward about is how are we going to allow ourselves to evolve? And when you've done the hard work, my hope is that people walk away and think, I'm awesome. Like they close this book and they think, I'm amazing, because walking through hard things creates amazing people. And we don't always acknowledge it as a society, and we certainly don't always acknowledge it as individuals, because it came from such a hard place, because it was so difficult to do. In my opinion, that makes it 10 times more worth celebrating and honoring the resilience you've built, the life you build for yourself, the opportunity to take this precious time we have on this earth, which we all know is, and especially people who are grieving know that it's finite. We don't know how long it's going to be, but making the most of the time that we have is such a gift, not only to ourselves, but also potentially to the world at large. And so my hope is that people can come through the steps that are laid out in Different After You, and that where they land is a sense of pride, a sense of accomplishment, and the ability to be joyful about owning who they've become.
Michele, can you share also a little bit about the Camp Widow and Soaring Spirits, which, as you said, it was something that became the new you, and it came out of the ashes into Soaring, a whole new space, not only for you, but what you have created for the widowed and the bereaved.
When I was first widowed and looking for other widowed people, I accidentally created a community by asking a bunch of other widowed people, how did you do this? How did you do this? And the thing that came to me at that time was that I didn't ever feel more understood than when I was with another widowed person. They just got it. And I felt hopeful in a new way. And so I wanted the opportunity for other widowed people to have access to that feeling that came to me each time I met another widowed person, even if we had nothing else in common, even if our experiences of death were completely different. Maybe it was an expected death, maybe it was a really long marriage. All of those things didn't matter. What mattered was they understood what it was like not to have their partner physically in their life. And so from that time, I started slowly building a nonprofit organization, which is called Soaring Spirits International. We've been serving for 14 years for widowed people. We offer research-based programming that is built around a peer support model, both online and in person. Since we were founded in 2009 or 2008, sorry, we've served over 4 million widowed people. And that is an opportunity of coming together in community. That's what we offer consistently. Camp Widow is sort of the flagship event of that effort, which is a weekend long event. We actually have two versions, a weekend long and a pop-up, which is a one-day camp that allows widowed people to come together in community, to have access to tools that will help them rebuild their lives, to have the interaction with other people who are also rebuilding their lives so that we can kind of shape what is normal. And that's such a broad scope that it helps people realize, okay, I'm doing okay. Like, you know what, actually, I feel like this is something that I can do. That's our hope, from people to walk away from Camp Widow feeling like, okay, I can figure this out. I'm going to find a way to build a life for myself. So those two parts of my unexpected life, you're absolutely right, they grew from me asking the questions consistently, not only of myself, but other widowed people. So Camp Widow is built around the answers to questions. When we kept asking people, what do you need? What would you like? How could we better serve you? We asked that question repeatedly in order to continue to evolve the program in the same way we ask our people to evolve into new versions of ourselves and new versions of the program that are going to best serve widowed people as they figure out how to build this life for themselves that they feel confident owning, and then feel grateful to be living. That's our hope.
Beautiful. Michele Neff Hernandez, everyone, and go get the book, Different After You. Michele, anything that we haven't touched upon that you really, really want everybody to know?
I just want to close by saying Different After You is a love letter to anyone who has experienced a traumatic life event or experience. And that my hope is that it is not a book that you read just once, but that anytime you're struggling with, you can go back and go, oh yeah, I want to look at that step again, because that can help me in this new struggle. So, write on it, pour coffee on it, carry it around in your purse, throw it under the mat in your car. I hope that it gets to be carried with you into your life, because it's truly is a love letter to anyone who's struggled, to say, I see you and I believe in you.
Beautiful. Michele Neff Hernandez, everyone. Different After You. Go get that book. Thank you so much, Michele, for being with me and having this conversation, and letting me read the book and be a part of this conversation with you.
Oh, such a joy. Thank you so much.
For all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.